Hello, darling. That's some Conway Twitty that you're listening to on 88.5 KAKU. It's after 5 o'clock, time for the live show, and today's guest is a big guy that wants to talk about tiny, tiny things, and that's just the start of what we'll get into on a big Friday show. Plus, got to say, hey, once again, our interns are running the show, so if anything messes up, completely not my fault. How we start the show? Roll the intro.
Live from beautiful downtown Kahului, on the #1 island destination on planet Earth, the Valley Isle, Maui. From the Akaku studio at Halfway to Hell Plaza, it's live! And now, a man that's known far, but not wide. It's Shaggy!
Shaggy, and we are on the show. Nice to see you today. If you're just joining us for the first time and want to join us, I don't know, anytime you want to, 877-6363. Today's guest, been really looking forward to this. Not too long ago, I'd put out a list on Facebook of ultimate guests I wanted on the show. This guy's name was on the list. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Erik Blair.
Aloha. Glad to be here.
Oh, God, I am so glad to have you in the building. And here's the thing. I really, really, really should have planned the shot better just so that they could see the sheer amount of height difference between the two of us.
That's right. Don't have too many of those guys in here.
No, I'm telling you, this is the land of the little people in this studio, man. I think actually we have a height requirement. If you're over 5'6", you cannot work the show.
Exactly. That's why I haven't applied. The only reason.
Oh, but now this is a great thing because nationwide, I have been following this trend lately of people trying to build sustainable, self-sustainable houses. And then all of a sudden, you know, I'm going through my Facebook feed and I see this thing from you on tiny houses, which is kind of the nickname for self-sustaining houses. Can I just ask like a real general question?
Sure.
How long have you been following this trend?
A little more than a year.
What got you into it?
Well, I think it stems from the lack of affordable housing on Maui. And so I've been here since 2009, and I've got my taste of it. So I was looking for alternatives, and suddenly I started seeing all these incredible folks out there trying to do some new style affordable housing of their own, kind of like pioneers, like they used to do the old gypsies, going out in the wild and doing their own thing. And it seemed very appealing to me to find these really attractive, well-built homes on wheels.
Man.
Pretty awesome.
And when you started looking into it, because like for me, it was the father-daughter team from Oregon that built a house and then he passed away. Kind of a sad story. That's the one that really got into the tech of it. At what point can you say that it went from being something that was kind of interesting to, oh wow, this is actually a good idea?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think for anybody who gets into the concept of tiny houses, they're going to start seeing, well, why would they want to put it on a trailer? It's kind of the first thing they say, you know, and it usually stems from the whole idea of, well, there's rules and regulations out there when you build a house. And also some people don't actually own the property. So they try to find this solution. And so the solution itself is pretty much innovative. It's like, wow, okay, let's find what's missing. And what's missing is these rules and this ability to live on somebody else's land instead of building an infrastructure. So for me, it was finding an innovative solution for living a sustainable life. And that's what intrigued me. You know, now we can have a dwelling, we call them dwellings also. We can have a little dwelling and live sustainably, live with less is more, live outside more, and less inside, affordably.
And see, here's the thing that I really liked about this, and I think that possibly you're one of the only other guys that's got onto this thing. Tiny houses, small dwellings, are perfect for Maui and Hawaii, not only because of the cost of real estate, the cost of land, the cost of infrastructure, but because we are a very outdoor civilization here.
That's right.
You know, and when you look at these houses, we're not talking about palatial mansions, or we're not even talking about like the little camper pup tents. Like, can you explain some of the most interesting things that we have seen in some of these designs?
Sure. So everything comes from a smaller footprint. So you've got the small footprint of about 8 feet wide by about 20 to 30 feet long. So that's anywhere from 120 or 110 feet on the minimal side to 240 square feet on the long side. And so when you have that, people say, well, what am I going to do with that space? And so I've seen most of them all have lofts where they have sleeping lofts, so they use that extra space. So they'll have a 12 or 13 foot tall tiny house, and then they'll have people sleeping in that upper area. So then that leaves the whole bottom floor plan for kitchens and different kinds of kitchen arrangements, Murphy beds for extra people if you want to have extra people over. I mean, really innovative stuff there. But also solar, using water catchment, combining it with container gardening. I mean, there's a lot of other aspects to it. Using a composting toilet or all these different functions that you can actually implement in these homes that you couldn't necessarily do because you would have to be required to follow some kind of a international building code of some kind otherwise.
And just between me and you, is this building code actually there for safety, or is it there because, hey, well, if we make you pay X amount for this and X amount for that, we make more money off of it? Which is it when it comes to these regulations?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on your perspective, obviously. The first thing I would say to that is that if you look way back before the 40s, most houses were smaller than 3-4 bedrooms.
Oh, yeah.
They were 1 and 2 bedrooms. And everything was smaller. The kitchens and the bathrooms and the bedrooms were all smaller. And what ended up happening is they started taxing by square footage. And when they started taxing by square footage, suddenly the bigger the house, the more revenue for whatever tax agency is collecting taxes for that. Also, when they started pricing them, they priced them for square foot. So all the developers who were selling these homes originally, obviously the bigger the house, the more money they can get for their house. And so this trend towards bigger and bigger and bigger, we call them McMansions in the tiny house community. So the McMansions got bigger and bigger and bigger. So ultimately, we're left with this concept of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage home as your typical home in America, which has brought the median home price up really, really high. Therefore, nobody can afford it, or the majority of folks can't afford it. I know for a fact that 49 million people in the United States cannot afford to buy a home, period.
Wow.
They just can't do it. And so if there's that level of people that cannot afford even to get into a home, they're going to be renters. And so obviously, now we're on the other angle of it. If a landlord can rent property, thus they're creating income.
Yeah.
So they're happy to afford these big houses and pay high taxes on it and pay a high dollar for it because they're going to get all this rental income. So it's really a business for that from their perspective. So as far as costs and square foot and as far as getting permits and that kind of thing, which is the other perspective, it really is a revenue generator for any municipality that says you have to follow these codes. Because in reality, they waive a lot of other stuff for big developers to come in and say, well, you want to do all this wonderful stuff, but when the little guy wants to build a little home, there's a long list of check marks they got to get approved.
And see, that's something that I've noticed. Like, if you're a commercial developer, like if I said I'm going to come over here and I'm going to build a 3,000 square foot facility and it's going to have the capabilities of doing X amount of business in this area, you're going to see that red tape fall really, really quickly.
Right.
But if I'm a guy and I say, you know what, I would really like to purchase some land, build a 500-foot square home, I'm going to go through building code after building code after inspection after delay after red tape.
That's right.
So when the tiny house thing or the small dwelling actually came up, do you think that more people were, A, trying to reclaim what we were back in the 40s and 50s where America was sensible with our sizes of our dwellings? Or is it B, kind of a thumbing their nose at the man, kind of a, which one do you think it is?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a very good question. I never thought about it as thumbing the nose at the man, but I think it's thumbing the nose at the lack of freedom. And that's kind of the big thing. I think maybe we did have a lot more freedom. If you bought the land back in the 40s, you could build whatever you wanted on it in the 40s. You want to build a 200 square foot home or a 2,000 square foot home, you could do so.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to go through all the red tape and the cost associated with that. But so I think the tiny house movement is more about more freedom and more affordability and more sensibility.
This is the thing, too, because we do live right now in a time where everybody is saying, go green, and do things more sensibly when it comes to the environment. Here's the funny part. The building codes and everything that we build, normal structures, have none of that vision in it.
Right.
Yet when you go over to the tiny dwellings, the tiny house concept, these guys are all about minimal footprint,
Right.
maximum usage.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it make sense, in your opinion, if we could somehow get these two worlds together and say, look, okay, guys, if you want to build these McMansions, great. But why don't we take some lessons from this self-sustainability movement of the tiny houses?
Sure.
Will there ever be a day?
Yes, and I think the day is coming very soon because the tiny house movement is growing so rapidly. It is actually touching that area in every municipality in the entire United States. And right now, I can't remember exactly how many states, but most of the states that I've seen, tiny houses coming up, they're getting approval from city council. There's eco villages and any kind of sustainable small communities. They call them micro communities are popping up everywhere of these tiny houses. They're solving the homeless problem in a lot of places because of it. So it's growing slowly. And every municipality is trying to find a way to do it without it hampering their normal process of the McMansions.
No.
So, like, for example, I got some notes here. And so, for example, Honolulu just recently spent about $4 million to solve what they consider an affordable housing problem in Akaku. Or not, yeah, it was in Kaka'aku. And I was thinking, what, here?
Yeah, I know. It's like, they've put
But,
housing in our room?
Yeah, here we go. So, but what they did was they spent about $4 million, and they're in the process of developing 24 units with $4 million. So that's about $160,000 a person, right?
Yeah.
So, to me, that seems like, well, if I had $4 million and some land that we could put some tiny houses on, I could probably put about 160 tiny houses for that same amount of money. So to me, it's like, well, let's see. Do you want to help 24 people or 160 people with that same amount of money? So municipalities are looking at it from that perspective now. They can save a ton of cash. So there's been some other places, like, for example, in Portland, they spent $47 million on a similar project for, bringing affordable housing to their community, and they're only going to service about 150 families or units.
That's
And
it?
Yeah, with $47 million. So with that amount of money, I mean, you can imagine how many tiny houses you could build. And here's the other thing. They're only renting those properties out to people. They're not actually gaining any ownership. So part of the problem with the affordable housing is, you're creating a system where you're constantly renting to these people rather than them ever owning anything.
And see, that's the part that really gets me, because over the course of my lifetime, I started out life somewhere in the 70s. I don't want to say how far back.
Nobody
but
really knows.
Nobody really knows. Not even my parents at that point, actually. I was a quiet child. When you go through my life, just mine, back in the 70s and 80s, the promise of owning a household was what our parents taught us. This is the American dream. One day you're going to grow up, you're going to have land, there's going to be a building on it, and what happens on that land and that building is going to be completely your decision. But then the 90s happened. Then we had the big real estate bubble that popped right around the mid-90s and then just totally decimated us again in 2001 and 2002. It doesn't seem like, as a society, home ownership seems to be that big of a priority anymore.
Right. It's shifting. It is shifting. You're seeing home ownership is still a priority for the mindset of everybody. They all still want to try to get that carrot at the end of the stick. But really, the carrot's a lie and the stick's being used for other purposes, if you know what I mean. So,
yeah, I don't want to say anything about a stick, but just use gloves.
Right, absolutely.
It's horrible.
So, but the point is that it's more and more difficult to own a home. Okay, we get that. And that's because they've built these giant mansions instead of more sensible homes. It's also because there's a lot of greed built into the whole concept of the real estate market. And so everybody's getting their money. And if you really look at what it takes to buy a home nowadays, even though it says, okay, the median home price in the United States is $1,000, the reality of that is nobody's getting into that home for that price. They're getting into that home for about $900,000 when they're all said and done with mortgage payments and whatnot. So in the reality, it's $1 million on average for a house nowadays.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what it is, because you're basically paying monthly into a mortgage. So you're buying a mortgage. You're not actually buying a house. You're buying a lifetime of debt. So the difference between a tiny house is a tiny house costs anywhere from $12,000 to $25,000 to build. Basically, I've seen them as high as $87,000 for a tiny house. So it depends on what kind of Ferrari you want to build. But it's obviously it's going to be under $100,000 to buy your house. At that point, all you need is somewhere to park it. So people are offering parking spaces to rent. You can buy land pretty affordably in some places in the United States still today. So you can basically get into a nice situation for your tiny house affordably in the United States still today if you go with a tiny house.
Okay, now, when we talk about tiny house construction, though, this is where it gets tricky because there's codes and there's, they all vary, but on average, what would you say would be a footprint of one of these houses?
Yeah, the footprint is about 8 feet wide because that's the legal trailer width.
Okay.
So everything has to depend on what the Department of Motor Vehicles said in Hawaii.
Oh.
This is the key because the only way to get around the International Building Code is to go with a different overseeing agency. So the authority or the jurisdiction in Hawaii for tiny houses is not the Public Works or the Planning Commission. It's the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Okay.
That's the reason for the trailers. So the footprint is 8 feet wide, so it can go through the tunnel, so it can go through on a highway again. So it
Yeah.
can go down the road. It has to legally be no wider than 8.5 feet. So to put it on a trailer, it's 8.5 feet wide by about 20 feet wide. Is about 20 feet long is the footprint of a tiny house.
So
That's
8
it.
feet by 20. Now, you would think, like, especially guys like me that are just very compact, you would think that this still would be so cramped a small space. But the thing is some of the articles that I've read through your postings and some of the things that I've looked up in my own, some of these are very lavish 8 foot by 20 foot establishments.
Certainly. I mean, yeah, you can. It's funny. A lot of folks in other countries have already used to making smaller spaces into more multi-use spaces. So like Japan, for example, and some of the Netherlands, they have fold-out beds and walls that slide, and what looks like a bed can be completely transformed into a dining room table and whatever. And so nowadays in these tiny houses, they can be configured any way you want. I've seen them sleep as many as 4 people, which I think is an amazing for 160 square feet. And you can have staircases and ladders, and you can have lofts and storage areas, and French doors and all kinds of really cool stuff in a tiny house that if you were to go and try to do the same thing in a big house, it's going to cost you an additional $300,000 at least.
God.
And what are you paying for? You're paying for space. And what's the other difference? The other difference is when you buy a house, you're buying a brand new house and you're coming from a 3-bedroom furnished apartment. The first thing you're going to have to do is fill that thing full of furniture.
Oh, God, yes.
So there goes your costs again, up higher and higher and higher. Then you got to clean it and maintain it. How much time is that going to take? Well, a tiny house doesn't take that long to clean. So that's
100
another
square
bonus.
feet. Yeah.
That's right. And it also doesn't take that much to heat or to cool.
Oh.
So there's a lot of other benefits. And here's another benefit specifically to Hawaii. When you see on the news, you hear about the volcano activity over in the Big Island.
Oh, yeah, the VOG.
Well, not just that. When you see the lava, right? So the lava flow, it's really not that predictable. So you see homes every once in a while burning down. Well, what the folks do over there is they live in these homes until the last weeks or whatever when the lava's come into their area. Then they pack up everything and leave as the lava's approaching, and then they watch their house burn down.
Wow.
We don't want to do that.
No.
And so tiny houses are their solution because then they can pull up to their area where they're going to live. They live in their tiny house, and when the lava gets close, they move to another area. It's that easy. They bring their home with them. No more unpacking.
And see, that's just it too, because people they're hearing us talk about homes on wheels, and they're thinking about the traditional, dare I say it, trailer parks that people like me inhabit, where the house is on wheels, but it's parked and it's joined to an electrical grid and it's joined to a water line and all of this stuff. So essentially, house on wheels, but it's firmly mounted where it is. These aren't, though.
Right, they're not. Right.
What is some of the technology that makes this possible?
Sure, it's going back to old school ways of doing things. It's living more off the land, not necessarily being connected to any kind of electricity whatsoever. Some people do, they run an extension cord. Some people do that, not advised. But you can get solar panels for your roof, for solar. Put some batteries, so you can put a panel in the back of your tiny house with a bunch of batteries in it. There's a lot of different ways to handle electricity. So you don't really need that much electricity if you're not running, 17 fans in your house and, a big screen TV and all those other things. You don't need that in a tiny house. So you can basically live off grid. Another thing they do is they use propane instead of any other kind of electricity to do any cooking or whatever. So you can also use wood depending on where you live in the country. They have miniaturized all these stoves to make them highly efficient now. So you can use a pile of wood no bigger than your two hands to cook an entire meal. And that's it in these little stoves. So it just depends on where you are. And here, obviously, there wouldn't be as much availability of wood. You wouldn't want to be cutting down a bunch of trees here. But it depends on what you do. So propane is easy. Propane for hot water heating. So to get a hot shower, for example. They've got little tiny units. They go on the outside of your tiny house, and it's on demand. So
the Paloma.
That's right. So you just turn it on, and suddenly the little tiny burner goes on, propane burner inside the unit, and it heats the tube. The water's coming right out, and it's instant heat on your hot water.
And then when you turn it off, there's no electricity. There's no nothing.
And it's just turning the hot water on and off. It's not like a big ordeal where you got to go. I got to go light that. I got to go do this. You just turn the hot water on, and the demand for that hot water automatically kicks on the unit instantly. So, and you save a lot of fuel that way. So it's only used when you actually need the hot water. So just don't leave your hot water running. You're good.
And this is all just making me see something that I think is right on the tip of what we're talking about. But I don't think people have quite caught on to this. This is how Americans used to live anywhere, not just tiny dwellings, not just in extreme circumstances. Do you think that as a country we've kind of lost a little bit of our backbone?
Yeah, we have. I think so. I think it's the rush to convenience and automation and the rush to be more productive. So we forget about being just us. God. We really have kind of given up on basic needs of an unstressful life. And it doesn't mean you can't go out and chop wood all day long. That's really good for you. But what people are expecting nowadays, well, you got to go work for somebody for 10, 15 hours a day to be a productive person out there. And then you go home to your completely convenienced McMansion and you watch TV until you pass out, and you get up and you do it all over again.
And see, here's the funny thing, because not too long ago, me and my wife owned a 2-bedroom house. And it was fine for us because it was our first house together. We were just trying to learn the ropes. Do you know what happened over the course of 3 years? We figured out that a 2-bedroom house at that size was too big for us. And we actually were seeing that the space that we were occupying for the amount of money that we were paying for it, I mean, I'm using one room of my house. When I go home, I basically go to the bathroom and, no, I'm just kidding, but I use 2 rooms. But when I go home, I whip out my laptop, go to the bedroom, start doing my evening work. Oh, hey, it's about time for Letterman. I turn on the TV and I watch a little TV.
Sure.
I'm asleep. I wake up the next day. I'm back out of the house. Right. For all the money in rent that I was spending out of the 2-bedroom house and all of that, I was using one room.
That's right.
In my mind, it doesn't make sense.
Right. Somebody's got to clean all those other rooms that you weren't occupied because they just collect dust.
Exactly.
Right.
And not only that, why am I paying for stuff that I don't use? And it seems like with the McMansion thing that has happened in America over the past 30-something odd years, we think that's the normal for paying for unused and wasted space.
That's right.
We have been programmed to think that's normal.
We accept it.
Why?
It's a very good question. And I think it has to do with that carrot at the end of the stick. In other words, we're thinking that we're looking for that dream, that American dream down the road. And so we keep kicking the can of, the environment will come later. We'll figure out a way to save the environment later. We'll figure out a way to, stop this cement usage in our society at some other point in history. But it's not happening. What's happening is we continue to stamp out these blueprinted McMansions everywhere in the country without thinking about, well, maybe somebody doesn't want to do it that way. Maybe they really want to downsize. That's what companies do. When they start realizing they're spending too much money, they downsize into something that's more sustainable and manageable. Well, why can't we do that?
It seems like it's become almost the antithesis of this. The whole complete 180 of this. Our thinking as individuals in America used to be, let me, with the sweat of my brow and the strength of my hands, carve my own, make my own, and sustain my own. Now it's like, okay, well, if you go to the job, that's great, and you get this car, hey, that's great, but this car isn't a Cadillac. You should go out and get a Cadillac.
Sure,
your house is nice, But, there's nicer ones in other neighborhoods.
The Jones next door has got a much better house than you do. Yeah.
At what point as a country did we start buying out of ego?
Right. I would say it was probably in the 70s, but that's just me. I'm weird that way. But
well, hey, Elvis died in the 70s, so
as far as we know. So, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a very good question. We haven't done enough self-reflection as to where we're going as a society. I think what we're doing is we're leaving a lot of things on the table. We're not looking at ways we can basically improve the lives of everyone. We're more the whole entire society is geared towards productivity and the creation of wealth, and not necessarily funneling any of that across the board. It's more specifically going towards corporations and heading in that direction. And we've seen that over the last 40 years. So part of that is real estate. Real estate has become a giant market where people, instead of thinking that, well, I'm going into an opportunity where I can enjoy this dream for the rest of my life, it really is a liability, not an asset, because you're going into $1 million worth of debt no matter what home you buy nowadays.
Wow.
And so think about it. What you're really doing is you're becoming economically enslaved to an economy. So what do? So for the next 20 to 30 years, you have to pay for this home. So you have to continue the productivity machine as long as you can, so you can do that. Instead of utilizing that money that you might do, because you might rent a place for $1,200, but you might buy a house for $2,200. So that extra money that you're spending to stay in that house that you're buying for the rest of your life, 20, 30, 40 years, that extra money that if you were renting, you're using that to pay for the high bills and pay the whatever fees you have and fixing your car and whatever else. So there's two different people out there. Well, what tiny houses does is it creates an alternative market. It takes some people out of that traditional mix of you're either going to rent or you're going to buy. And if you're either one of those, you owe me every month. So you never stop paying every month. And it's a debt. It's basically a liability as opposed to an asset. And the people think of it as an asset. It's really a liability. But a tiny house is an asset. Once you've paid it and you have it, you have the freedom to move anywhere you want to go.
And it's yours.
Right, it's yours.
No mortgage, no liens,
That's
no
right.
power companies.
Right, and you can easily find a parking space. For example, I just did an informal poll with some of my friends who have land on Maui. And I just said, hey, if I get a tiny house, can I park it on your property? Oh, yeah, sure. Was that easy, I said? They said, yeah. I go, well, I might need to use your hose. I might need to park my car. Well, yeah, we'll work that out. And so some people have said, well, I said, hey, I want to give you $100 a month to park my tiny house on your land. Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Easy. I haven't had anybody say, no way. I'm not going to let that happen.
Wow.
So it's not so hard to think of it as an ohana.
Now, can I ask an honest question, though? Because, I mean,
Careful.
people... No, this is a very honest question. Because, you see guys my size, you see guys your size, and I'm wondering if these people that you're approaching, if in some way are not intimidated by you, and that's why they're saying yes.
Well,
do you
the funny
think that
thing
is...
is, no, because I do a lot of stuff on social media, as you know, and so a lot of my questions are through this computer screen, so they don't actually see my size, and they're definitely not intimidated. So,
it was funny because I've seen you on Facebook and all of that stuff, and I've even seen pictures of when you go out, like the time you came right below my house to Ocean Vodka.
Yep.
I was like, oh my God, this guy's not that big. And then you come in the studio, and I'm like, oh dear God, we're going to need a bigger camera.
It definitely, next time you should have had a bottle of Ocean Vodka right here so we could just at least look at the bottle.
Oh,
Since you live so close.
I do. And I tell you, like, for me, going up country, that's like tiny house heaven. There's all this open land everywhere.
Sure.
And I know I'm coming up against a hard break here, but I really want to get into this, not only what kind of people would find this interesting, because there is a lot more people. I didn't think I would be interested in tiny houses until I saw them.
Certainly.
Now, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this. It's like a big geek project for me.
Certainly, yeah. It's a lot of fun.
So we'll talk about the people that are right for this, and why this might be the perfect circumstance for our problem that's growing here in the 50th state. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. I tell you what, we'll take a short break here at the bottom of the hour. If you'd like to join the show, well, you can do that. It's very easy. Pick up the phone and dial 877-6363-877-6363. Do you know how long it took me to memorize all these numbers? Okay.
I forgot them already.
Oh, okay. 877-6363. That's the phone number if you want to call in. You, of course, are listening live on our radio side, our great radio Ohana, KAKU 88.5 Keaku, and, of course, on the television side, Channel 55, Akaku, soon to be called Blue. No, I'm just kidding. I can't let that out yet. We'll be back in just a second with more of Erik Blair, more tiny houses, more sustainability, and more solutions that might work just for you. Stay tuned.
Did you know? These 6 major corporations control 90% of the media in North America. Akaku is public access TV, run by the people, for the people. Akaku is Maui County's agent of free speech and community media. Federal laws require cable companies to provide financial support for all public access programming. Akaku is your public access resource, and we're open 5 days a week. Community members can learn to use the equipment and tools needed to exercise their free speech. It's easy, too. Now you know.
At Akaku's Maui Community Television, we are committed to employing your access to media. Our goal is to certify community producers that will go out and create meaningful and local content for our viewing community. Akaku's Media Lab now offers classes in Apple Final Cut Pro 10, professional editing software. This class will cover basic editing skills and Final Cut Pro's 10 systems available at Akaku. With a maximum of 8 students to every instructor and 1 student per editing system, students will receive intimate and hands-on training.
And we are back. Welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us from the break, hi, we didn't go anywhere. We were thinking about it. For a brief moment, we were thinking, let's build a tiny studio and just go tour the island with it. But we're back. And, of course, joining me in the studio is Erik Blair. Oh, all right. So before we went to the break, we were talking about just some of the people that would find tiny houses interesting. So I grew up in a 1,000-foot square home. Okay, you know, you could say a mixed suburb. That's where I grew up. Okay.
A suburb mansion, yeah, small one, yeah.
You know, it was off the junior menu. But when I moved out of that house, the first house I moved into, of course, if you're from the South, you know, it's a mobile home. Mm-hmm. And I moved into a trailer. I liked it because it was convenient. You know, if I didn't like my neighbors, it was call a road crew and then move to another trailer park, you know. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I didn't like about it, at the end of the day, was at that age, I was very adventurous. Loved being on the road all the time. Wanted to see the whole country and wanted to do it with my own car. Mm-hmm. Something like a tiny house seems to me, at least for the spirit of adventure, Shaggy, seems to me that this can recapture the old America where we were more nomadic and where people from the East Coast eventually did end up in some place like Oregon or California after, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of just drifting around. I know it seems like in our society now is kind of a vagabond, kind of a bummy, kind of a slummy thing to do. But for me, I've always romanticized that part of America, and that's why I got into it. But then I noticed that there's a lot more people that would be into tiny houses if they just knew how cool they were.
Sure.
So if you can think of just personality types right off the top of the head, who out there in our audience, there's maybe 3 or 4 of them, who out there do you think would really kind of find themselves shocked at how interesting tiny house is?
Sure. Well, I think it's partly due to the construction that these are and the way they look. They're kind of like little boutique homes.
Oh, yeah.
So you find folks who might be interested in things like little towns and like Paia, Haiku, Makawao, these little tiny kind of boutique-y areas, those are very much the same kind of people who would like a tiny house. People who don't need to have, 7 bedrooms because in case they might have somebody come by, something like that. They really are, they're not for everybody. It's not one size fits all, right? So you're not going to find people who have, 3 kids who are going to want to, all be, mother and father and 3 kids inside of a 120 square foot house.
Well, you will, but 3 of them won't be alive.
That's right. 3 of them will be outside.
Yeah.
So you build a very big lanai.
Okay, honestly, is it illegal to chain your kids in the yard?
Yes, it's totally illegal.
Crap.
Yep. No matter how much you want it.
I'm just saying, sometimes they're brats. I mean, let them go. Let them go. No, just kidding. Okay, so now we know it's illegal. I am not terrible.
Good. All right, good. Okay.
I might be a little terrible, but no.
But yes.
You won't see big families with a lot of young children.
That's right.
However, on the other side of that spectrum, and this is where it really hits people, the empty nest syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
You're working your whole life away. You've raised the kids. They're gone. They've moved on. They've had their own kids. It's now just you and your spouse at home. And all you do is walk around all day reminded of all the space that you used to need.
That's right.
And all of a sudden the mind goes, I want to get out of here.
Right.
Older retired Americans seem to be enthusiastic about this.
Right. Because what they do is they see it as freedom, number one. They lived in that area and in that house because their kids were going to school, and they were involved in that community because they were raising a family. Well, suddenly the kids grow up, they go to college in other states. The next thing you know, they have this big, huge house that's echoing everywhere when they have a conversation. They're just too big. So, and they're also looking at retirement. So if they sell their home, suddenly they've got whatever amount of money they've invested in the home that's left over. They've got that money, and they got the freedom to go where they really thought, gee, I've always wanted to live there, but I couldn't afford it. Well, now they can find a piece of land rather than buying a house in that area, which would be very expensive, like Maui, for example.
Oh, God, yes.
They can buy a little slice of land or even lease some land from somebody in like Colorado or Portland or wherever they wanted to go, or Maui or Big Island, which is a very affordable land over there compared to here. They can buy that little piece of land, and then they build their own tiny house, or they have shipped over the components to put one together, or they have somebody come over and build one, depending on how much money they want to spend. And suddenly now they're in the area they wanted to be at a very affordable cost, and they've got money left over for retirement.
Wow. And that's just it. With our current economy and the current way things are set up, when it comes to retirement age, more than just a few people are saying, I can't retire now.
No, yeah, most people are looking at, gee, where am I going to become a greeter? Where am I gonna go and stand out and collect shopping carts? The retirement plans of the past are just their mechanisms to put money into some kind of somebody else's mutual fund. Unfortunately, it's just not always going to work for you. We don't know where that money is going to go eventually. So some people lost a lot of money, and now they're looking at all I have left is a home. So when they have this big, huge McMansion, maybe their solution is, some people go into those reverse mortgages.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the better solution rather than that is to sell that house, get as much money out of it as you can, and then find a smaller scale, sustainable solution for your retirement.
Well, when I think about my retirement, which is probably going to be with the way the government's looking now, never. But one sweet day, I hope to retire. And that's kind of my plan is, as a kid, as a teenager, I was really adventurous, wanted to just travel and take over the world. Now I've got this job, this whole studio. I've got people that follow me around and do what I say for some strange reason. My life is different. But at the end of it, when I'm done with this, when I actually hang up the microphone and I'm done, I've really started looking into tiny houses because, for me, this recaptures my adventure.
Sure.
And it's not just people like me that want to, go out and see the world. There's also this other element that I've noticed. And tell me if you've noticed this, okay? I tell everybody, the difference between a geek and a normal person. A geek likes something to an extreme measure.
Right, yeah.
I've probably met 2 or 3 in the past couple of days that I've been researching this show, tiny house geeks. guys that have forums and websites completely dedicated to nothing but technique and technology
Sure.
that they put into these.
Innovations.
I have seen like satellite uplinks and photovoltaic, what's it called, macerating toilets, composting toilets that put out straight into a pot of, well, a potted plant area. I mean, when you think about just how cool the world of science is and how cool the world of building and construction is, tiny houses really could possibly keep a man or woman entertained for 2 or 3 lifetimes.
For certain.
I mean, what's one of the coolest things that you've actually seen incorporated to a tiny house design?
Really, I like the fact that you don't have to have too much confusion. You don't necessarily have to keep up with the Joneses. So for me, I like the simplicity of it. I like the fact that everything is easy. It's so much simpler. You can just go to sleep when you need to go to sleep. You get up. You got one spot to do everything, and it's all within a few feet. To me, it's easier. It's simple. It's less stress. But as far as innovations, I like some of the cool stoves. I mean, obviously here we wouldn't necessarily need heating stoves.
Yeah.
But in some places they have these really cool, really small looking stoves that you really literally only have to put a handful of twigs into them and it heats the whole tiny house all day. And so those are really innovative stoves, and they take no electricity whatsoever. They're just completely off grid. And then I've seen, different kinds of cooking surfaces that are used, and everything from somebody who's using rubbing alcohol as a fuel with using a beer can as a stove. I've seen some really interesting, I'm not recommending that, but I mean, it's pretty interesting that he spends probably 75 cents to $1 a month for all his cooking fuel.
Wow.
Yeah. So it just depends on how much you cook and how often and what you eat. I mean, you can really reduce your costs down to almost nothing. If you think about where we're going with Social Security, if it's still around, people could live on Social Security in a tiny house with ease and have money left over.
And that's nothing that happens now. My dad lives in probably one of the smallest, I guess you could say, conventional trailers there is. Not a big footprint, but still, when it comes to his Social Security and the medication and various stuff that we as adults need as we get older, he's always in the hole every month.
Right, because he's probably paying to be in that community, which if you have a community of tiny houses, you'll probably have to pay to be in that community. But he's also probably paying for a hookup to electricity, to water, paying probably a high electricity bill. It's those are built with relatively, mobile homes are built completely differently than tiny houses. Tiny houses are built like old houses. They're built sturdy with 4x4s and 2x4s, and they're made very strong so they can withstand a certain amount of bad weather like hurricanes and whatnot, as opposed to mobile homes.
That's one of the things I was going to bring up, because at the end of the day, when he's still ending in the hole, when you look at tiny houses and you look at a traditional standard mobile home, if bad weather came along, I want to be in the tiny house.
For sure. Right.
I've been through a hurricane in a mobile
Certainly.
home. That's nothing I ever want to repeat again.
That's right. And the other thing about the tiny house is that, let's say, for example, you live in a tsunami zone. Tsunami comes, you hook it up to your truck, and you drive it up country.
Yeah. Tsunami doesn't come, hey, you drive it back downhill.
Drive it back, you're done, yeah.
Yeah, and it's hilarious to me, because as you know, right now, Maui is having a huge issue with homeless. And we seem to be in this mode of the last couple of years of, we don't really deal with them, we just shuffle them.
Yeah, you just kick the can down the road.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, it's like, oh, you're in this neighborhood now. We'll let you stay there for a couple months. Well, they complained. Let's kick you off. And tiny houses, if approached realistically, could possibly not only hugely alleviate some of this, but in the long run, we could see almost homelessness stamped out.
Sure. A lot of it comes down to, where does homelessness come from? So a lot of people would argue that a lot of it's mental illness or addiction to drugs or whatever. So what we do is we basically say, well, then you tell them, oh, go over there and you'll get help over there. Instead of saying, well, if we had them all in one area, and then we could bring the help to them, we could identify better what the problems are, and then each one is going to have their own solution. You can't have a one-size-fits-all solution for homelessness.
No.
There's several different problems going on, and some of them stem back to, well, I was born poor, and I've always been poor, and I've never had any opportunity because I didn't know where to go or what to look for. Some rare cases of that. And then they got into drugs or alcohol, and now we're blaming it on some kind of addiction. But there's a lot of other, could be mental illness, could be that, hey, I was working at this job for 30 years and they went out of business. And now I have these one set of skills that I've been doing forever, and now there's nothing available for me. Or the fact that I think we're at 5% unemployment right now. 5% of the people can't get a job. So what do? Well, they are part of a system that we, as a taxpayer-paid system, that is helping those people. And so when they looked at the costs of all this, they say, in order to help all those people and there are all those different problems, they're still homeless, but we're spending like $28,000 a year per homeless person to help them with those issues. When you could turn that completely around and say, well, let's take some money, let's spend $15,000 per tiny house. And it's not going to be for everybody because some people are going to have families. Okay, but we're going to have individuals and couples that just can't find a place. So we put them in a tiny house community that is specifically designed so that it's quick and easy to teach people how to live in a tiny house because they're used to living in McMansions.
Yeah.
So once we get them in that setting, then we bring the solution to them. We say, this is your solution. And they're right there in that little tiny house community instead of all spread out. And that money that we would normally spend and they're not in a house is now spent and they're in a house. So it will solve the tiny house, the homeless problem in the United States if we look at it that way.
And see, here's the thing. At least from my opinion, I'm looking at government officials. They seem to be completely glossing over this, concentrating mostly on what's happening with the economy on the corporate scale. But economies function in two different ways. You have what all the business does, and then you have what the individuals do.
Right.
And right now, individuals aren't doing too well. But
Right.
nobody's really looking at them, and you've got all these guys out there that are saying, this tiny house thing is going to take off. I got to ask, do you see this as something that, even though me and you are like well ahead of the curve talking about it, you think this is something that's actually going to start coming more and more to the forefront of the American viewer?
I think it already is. In fact, they just released June 3rd, the first documentary about tiny houses. And I can't remember the full name. I'm still waiting to get on Netflix so I can go ahead and watch it. It's available on Netflix now. But they've done documentaries. They've got, as your research found, there's tons of Facebook groups and pages, and it's really growing. And I don't know the percentages of how fast it's grown because it's grown exponentially over the years. But it's becoming right there in the front of the news. There was just a Fox News special and a CNN special, and it's getting on the mainstream media now. So to some, it's seen as a threat. Well, gee, now we can't get that revenue. So a lot of the folks who are in municipalities, in local governments and whatnot, they're saying, well, gee, how are we going to get revenue? So here in Hawaii, we've got that solved because we pay the DMV for registration fees for the trailer.
Aha.
So technically speaking, when you get a tiny house, you pay that registration fee every year for the right to live in your tiny house.
Yeah.
So they're getting revenue. It's just not the McMansion revenue.
But you're always going to have, dare I say it, idiots with too much money and too little sense that are going to buy those.
Sure. Absolutely.
So I don't want to put this too far out there, but as a society, shouldn't we let the stupid people waste their money in their mansions and all of us smart people go to tinies?
I'm okay with that. Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. I think this is not a solution for everybody. It's a solution for people who want it. And so that's the difference. I mean, you don't want to force people, you have to live in a tiny house. We have enough folks that are, like, for example, affordable housing. There's plenty of affordable housing out there. Not enough necessarily, but
No.
you can find it. But if we insert the alternative, which is tiny houses, in there, then that's going to alleviate some of the pressure on the affordable housing that's out there. So in other words, some of those people will move into tiny houses and become self-sustainable. Thus, we save money on that other end from a government perspective. So really, you're looking at a cost savings for taxpayers, ultimately.
And if I was trying to get reelected, I would be saying this is my plan.
Right.
Or if I was
Right.
just trying to get elected, because
Right.
everybody at the end of the day likes saving money.
That's right.
And this saves a lot of people money.
Saves a ton of money, and you can still solve people's issues socially. So as far as a social justice or social services point of view, you're shifting money from what you normally do to put a Band-Aid on things to what you do to give somebody a cure for those things, or at least to provide them with the right path. See, when somebody's homeless and you say, well, here's some food, well, that's good for today, but what about tomorrow? And where am I going to sleep tonight? You know what I mean? And so you can't just keep trying to fix the problem temporarily. You've got to look at more permanent solutions, and it's encouraging and motivating and enabling people to do that that's going to work better.
Now, here's the interesting thing, because we've been talking off and on about homelessness here, and you're talking about certain types would gravitate towards the tiny homes, and it would save the government money. But here's an interesting fact, because I know right now in our audience, some of them listening are going, who cares about the homeless? They don't want to work. They don't want to do this. Here's an interesting statistic for you. Did you know that more than half of the homeless in the state of Hawaii works full-time jobs?
That's right.
So if I was one of those people making the argument that, well, we shouldn't care about this, where is that line that I draw? We're talking about normal, everyday, good, upstanding people,
Hardworking.
with full-time jobs, not able to put a roof over their
Right,
head.
that they're sleeping in their cars at the beach. I know a few of them. So basically they use the shower at the beach or the gym or wherever else to get by. And it's because they're not generating enough income to get into a living arrangement that works for them with minimum wage or whatever they're making.
Yeah.
So it's a
And
scary thought.
It is real scary, because when you think about that, and we're talking about yearly incomes, 25,000, 32,000. That's the average that I'm talking about here. That income anywhere else in the country, you might be able to find a small studio apartment in a traditional type of housing environment. Over here in Hawaii, you're not going to find that.
Right.
At all.
Right.
At all. So if I was one of these people, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got my choice of working, saving, which, by the way, when you're homeless, saving, not an
What's
option.
saving? Yeah, what's
You
saving?
don't, because everything's out of pocket.
Right.
Every meal's out of pocket. Every time you need a shower's out of pocket.
Right.
It creates a terrible cycle that keeps you
That's
homeless. If I'm one of them, and I'm listening to this show or I'm watching this show, I'm going to look at this and say, so you mean to tell me minimum investment, maybe a year or two down the road, I will be in a self-sustainable house that I can move place to place to place to place. Oh, and it's mine forever. Is it really that big of a jump for this to be, dare I say, a good idea? Because it seems like for all the, I guess you could say, all the pleading that I'm doing in these questions about why is nobody seeing this as a good idea, there's a lot of people out there saying, oh God, all you're going to do at this point is clog up the roads and things like that. But honestly, do we have enough space in Maui for something like a tiny house community?
Of course we do. There's so much space in Maui, it's ridiculous. The problem is that, people would rather see a golf course put in than a tiny house community.
I do not play golf. I have never played golf. As a matter of fact, I have given an old lady a concussion from the one time that I have tried to play golf. I'm not one of the people that wants to see a golf course.
Sure.
Are you?
I'm okay with the golf course. I'm perfectly fine with that. But I think that there's lots of space out there that's not being used. For example, if the county, for example, here's a good example. They have tons of land out there. If you look at a tax map and you start clicking around on a tax map in county, you'll see everybody owns little pieces of chunks of land that there's nothing on. Some of that land is owned by the county. What they do is they buy these little intersections where they think a road might go someday, so that then they don't have to deal with buying it from some owner. So they have this, and I'm working on a network for this so we can see down the road how much land there actually is. But if there's 17 acres, for example, that's just open space that nobody's doing anything with, that the county owns in Haiku, and I'm not actually saying that this is an actual place, but if there just was this one 17-acre lot in Haiku that nobody's using that the county owns, why not? Because a tiny house community is mobile. So let's say that at some point in the future that the county said, well, gee, we need to make something there for the county. So we're gonna now do that. No problem. A certain number of days notice, and everybody can move the tiny houses to a different county property. It's that easy.
And that single-handedly solves the problem right there.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you say that county buys land, we're talking about they'll buy land that they're not planning on using for 20, 25 years.
Right. And some of it they forgot about. It's just on a map somewhere.
Wait a minute. They bought land and they forgot about it?
Absolutely. That's what I mean. I mean, when you look at a tax map and you look at the records of that, it's from way back. It's just sitting there. It'll be a corner. We were going to put a water tower there.
Yeah, but then water towers are obsolete.
Or even the water tower will be there. There's some water towers up country. I've seen basically a water tank in the middle of nowhere on a half-acre piece of property with 7-foot tall weeds growing around it. You could put 2 tiny houses on that same property with the water tank.
And nobody would notice.
Problem solved. And if you get an artist in there, imagine the beauty on that water tank.
Yeah, and see, that's another thing. Because like communities like Portland and places like that, when they started looking at the tiny houses things, they saw it more of as a bohemian movement. So you do have the artsy types, and their homes are really nice just to look at. They're tiny pieces of art.
They are. They're really beautiful. I've seen some really amazing stuff. Another thing they're doing in Oregon, for example, is they're working on a tiny house micro community that they charge rent instead of ownership, but it's only $250 a month.
That's it?
That's it. And so if you meet certain affordable housing requirements on your amount, how much money you make, then you only have to pay $250 a month. So imagine if something like that was happening on Maui. I mean, how many people wouldn't look at that like, gee, you know what? I can downsize. I don't need, 7 closets of shoes. I can move into a tiny house for
Okay, wait a minute.
$250
Can you repeat that last part for my wife specifically? You do not need 7 closets full of shoes.
But with a tiny house, the cool thing is you can put a loft in there for all your shoes, should you need that many shoes.
And see, that's just it. You remember the movie Overboard?
Mm-hmm.
And he had that really cool cabinet design and things like that. Some of these tiny houses go that intricate.
They do, yes. I've seen some amazing stuff. I mean, even people put in, like, for example, use a lot of Japanese design on the inside. I've seen some really amazing bathtubs in a tiny house, or showers that are really truly amazing with some kind of colored glass that's obscured on the wall. Really beautiful stuff because it's all made out of wood. Mm-hmm. So these talented artisans are handcrafting these homes. It's really awesome.
And at the end of the day, wouldn't we love to see that here on Maui?
Absolutely.
Just beautiful, happy, smiling people that have homes and art on county property everywhere.
And I think the other key is on Maui, it's ideal to combine that with some kind of a food garden or food sustainable or food security project. And if that can happen, more the better. Because on Maui, there's 10,000 people minimum that are working for a living that have to utilize Maui Food Bank and Feed My Sheep to supplement their food every month.
Yeah.
So if we can solve that problem as well,
what
a wonderful place.
I know. And it seems like that all the things that we're doing is counterintuitive to what we've discussed on this show. Mm-hmm. Why is government so slow?
It's changing. I mean, for example, I'm going to give a plug out to Don Couch. He reached out to me, and he and I have been talking about this tiny house thing for a while, probably 4, 5, 6 months now. He even helped me do some research on the legalities of it, and one of his staff members is one of the people who showed me the actual law they found that says you can actually sleep in a trailer and you're on private property legally. So it's amazing that some county officials are actually willing to have the discussion and are actually looking into alternatives. Now, I'm sure there are more out there. It's just a matter of let's have that dialogue. Let's talk about it and let's get something going.
God, man. I tell you, this has been probably one of the most eye-opening shows as far as, what the American dream is. And it seems to me that going back to smaller, more functional, more reasonable, that should be the dream that we embrace now.
Absolutely.
God, Eric, thank you so much
Thank
for
you very
coming
much
on
for
the
the
show.
time.
If possible, I would love to just drag you out from time to time
Sure.
because, one, you know, me leaving the studio at night, kind of intimidating. Leaving with a guy your size, kind of not intimidating. So anytime you want to stop by the station after dark, please feel free.
Well, I'm hoping that in a year from now, you and I will do this show from inside a tiny house.
Okay. As a matter of fact, I will make that pledge right now. Mark the date. What is it? It's June 13th, right? All right. Carolyn says June 13th.
It's Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th. Holy cow. Friday the 13th in 1 year from now, which will be June 13th again, we'll come back and see if we can do this show in
Sounds
a
like a
tiny
plan.
house. All right. Eric, thank you so much
Thank
for being
you.
on the show. For everybody else, have a safe and happy weekend. Now, join us next week because Monday, I have no idea what's going on, and I have a lot of phone calls to make. But we have some really great guests talking about self-discovery and about music discovery and comedy discovery. That's all coming up on next.